Thank you, Jen, so much for being here today on Moms Who Have Been There. So, many people know you as the mom of 3 wonderful children. And you are, but I know part of your parenting journey includes your son, Ben, as well. So can you tell us the story of your son, Ben?
Sure. So, when I was 24, I had my second baby. And I should just let you know that when I was pregnant, I felt like there was something special about him. But the pregnancy was fine and the delivery was fine. And so I thought, well, maybe we'll just be great friends. Maybe that's what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was about 10 weeks old, I was changing his diaper one day and his legs kind of started to twitch. And I thought, I wonder if he's like shivering or cold or something, because I was changing his diaper, but I didn't know. And it just lasted for a few seconds, and so I was like, okay. I didn't think too much about it. Well, the next day I was sitting in church, and it started happening again, only this time his eyes were twitching and his arms were twitching, and it was going on for a lot longer. So I went and sat in front of a pediatrician in our congregation, and I said, what's happening,
Yes.
And so, we went out into the foyer, and he said, he's having a seizure, and, lots of kids have seizures. It's not that big of a deal. Just mention it to your pediatrician next time you go.
Okay.
So, it stopped, maybe a minute. And so I thought, okay. And so, anyway, that night at about 2 a.m, I heard him wake up, and I thought he needed to eat. So I looked at him, and he was having a seizure again, but each time it was getting kind of progressively worse. And so I called the doctor, and they said bring him in.
Okay.
And they kind of asked me, like, why didn't you bring him in when this first happened? And I said, well, I talked to this pediatrician. He said lots of people have seizures, not that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. Lots of kids grow out of it. So so they put him on phenobarbital, which is a common anti-seizure medication.
Okay.
And they said, come back in a week. So we lived in Greeley at the time, and his doctors were in Denver. So anyway, I came back a week later, and I went to the doctor, and they said, have you seen any seizures? And I said, no, I hadn't seen any. And they said, well, then it's probably working. And so I went to my mom's house, who was living in the area, and I was feeding him, and I felt him kind of jerk. And I looked at him, and he was blue. Wow. So I told my mom to call 911. I did CPR, and I did CPR until the paramedics arrived. So when we got to the hospital, we went in the ambulance, and then they actually air flighted him to the hospital. And basically what we found out is that he had a really rare seizure disorder, which basically they give the children up to 5 years to live. They said it's usually 3 to 5 years. And it's characterized by seizures which are very hard to control.
Okay.
And the reason that we hadn't seen anything was because it was basically just sedating him. So he was probably still having seizures.
You just couldn't
We
see
couldn't
them.
see them, right.
Okay.
So anyway, the reason that he had stopped breathing is he was losing his ability to suck and swallow. Anyway, he was losing his ability to suck and swallow, and he had aspirated, and so they had to put in a feeding tube, and it was just crazy,
1 minute it was normal.
Yeah.
The next it was totally upside down. Your life
Right.
was totally upside down.
And, everybody in my family dies from old age.
Yes.
So, it was pretty crazy, and it was just kind of like, what's happening. And anyway, so he had to have a G-tube, and I struggled with, doctors and nurses can do more than I can for him. And, I couldn't feed him anymore. But as time went on, I learned, I could tell what he needed. And the doctors and nurses were actually great, because they would say to me, well, what do you think he needs? And I'd say, well, it's his stomach. He needs something for that. Or it's, they would just go by what I said. And it was really interesting because I was actually in school at the time, and I stopped going to school part-time to take care of him. And, all the doctors and nurses kind of applauded that. They were saying, he's a special needs baby, and it's wonderful that you're caring for him. And I thought to myself, well, all kids are special needs kids. It's nice that they had that point of view. But anyway, lots of different things happened. He was in and out of the hospital, and once while he was there, he got RSV, and so I had to learn how to be a respiratory therapist.
Yes.
I had to suction him out when I got home, and I had to do those things for him. And the only medicine that worked was an injection. So I had to learn how to give him injections twice a day. And so, it was crazy. I had a 2-year-old at the time. I had him, and anyway, it was a hard time, but because I was with him day in and day out, I could see that I was the best person to take care of him, but I could also see that only God could really take care of him better than me. Yeah. Doctors and nurses didn't know him as well as I did. So anyway, he the day before he passed away, he spiked a really high fever, and he was inconsolable, which normally I could calm him down. I knew what he needed, and he was crying all day. And I called the doctor, and they had said, what does he need? And I said, I think it's his stomach, and they called in some medicine for that. And anyway, we took him to the hospital. We couldn't get the fever down, and so anyway, they gave him a bunch of medication that brought his fever down, I think, to like 103. It had been up by about 105.7 or something crazy. And so they were able to do that, and I kind of slept there in the hospital that night. And in the morning, he was resting, and I said, his color doesn't look good. He needs oxygen. And they came in and they gave him oxygen, and then they told me to call my husband, that they thought, this is probably it. Anyway, what was happening is that the part of your brain that regulates your heartbeat is also the part of your brain that controls your temperature. So basically, that was just giving out, kind of. And they said, we need to know what you want to do, And I said, well, I don't want to decide. I want God to decide. And they said, well, we think he is. So I just asked them to, keep giving him, the oxygen, but not to intervene, intubate him or whatever. And he passed away a couple minutes later.
I know that everyone grieves differently, so can you tell me a little bit about what the grieving process was like for you and your husband?
Sure. So he was really surprised that Ben had passed away. The doctors had been telling us these things all along, but he just kind of thought that doctors always give you the worst case scenario, and so
Yes.
I think it took him longer to get used to the idea.
Yes.
It's kind of one of those things where he doesn't like to talk about it, where I don't mind talking about it. Initially, I didn't really want to talk about it, and I remember going to church and wanting people to walk in with me so that I didn't have anybody to talk to me. I always had buffers, know.
Yes.
And Scott's parents were in our congregation at the time, and so, I kind of just sat in the middle because I didn't want to talk to people. But for the most part, I've been pretty open about it. And he doesn't like to talk about it at all. Doesn't like to watch movies about, children dying or anything like that. He doesn't want to talk about it. One thing that was kind of helpful is that Scott's parents also lost a child when she was 3, and so like the first night when we came home, we slept over there. We didn't want to be in the house.
Yes.
And so, they could understand and be sympathetic and stuff. But, I think because we both knew, where Ben was, it was kind of one of those things where it was just hard, but not, we didn't want to die ourselves.
Yes.
It was just kind of one of those things where you keep going.
Have to keep moving forward.
Just keep going.